entertained. We have Collette, Gilbert, and Andrew McClain here to talk to us about interesting items that could be found around a house many years ago. And I think it's going to be very entertaining. So thank you very much, both of you, and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, man, what do you want to do?
I don't know, woman. It's certainly a pleasure. I'm just enthralled with the turnout. I didn't expect so many people, and it's a little intimidating, but we're gonna have a good time tonight. It's an honor and a privilege to be asked to do this, and I'm really.
I thought it was an honor and a privilege to be married to me.
Woman.
Man. And child.
And child.
Christian,
And
take a bow.
Yeah.
Well, as far as living in the 18th century, there are so many things that we utilized that if you looked at these things now, it's antiquated technology, but this was completely necessary to having a successful, happy home 250 years ago. And being the woman of the house, the keeper of the hearth, there are certain things a mother and a wife would want to make sure that her family was well fed and taken care of. And there's some interesting items here that we can look at and wonder, what in the world were they used for? Oh, I like this one the best because when not in its proper use, I could use this as a ninja throwing star. Oh no, excuse me. It was used to make buttonholes. And you'd have a little hammer. Where's my hammer? Richard, where's the hammer? This is perfect right now.
Very, very, very sharp.
Oh no, I have witnesses. All right, so this was used to make buttonholes for waistcoats and frock coats, and it would save a great deal of time if you're making a frock coat with, how many buttonholes do you think a frock coat usually has?
I made a British uniform and it had 42.
42 buttons.
And each buttonhole required about an hour and 20 minutes.
And they have to be completely uniform. And then they're hand finished. You have to hand finish every buttonhole. So having a tool like this made every housewife or every tailor a much happier person.
The curious thing is, when I had no idea at the time that something like that existed, or that's how they did it, and so I cut with scissors. And if you cut the cloth with scissors, you don't cut straight. But if you use that very sharp tool, you could probably just press it and make the perfect slice in the fabric.
In fact, when we were first looking at this, we were thinking it might be some kind of chisel because of the angle.
I believe it was mismarked at one time as a carpenter's pocket chisel, and I can tell you that's the last thing I want in my pocket. Because I am a carpenter, and that's...
I actually was thinking this might have been an 18th century gossip's bridle. And I don't know if anyone's aware of a gossip's bridle. If you were a good wife and you gossiped too much or disagreed with your husband in public, heaven forfend I would ever do such a thing, they would fit you with a contraption that had certain metal implements that they would put in your mouth for up to 3 or 4 days to teach you. They would hold your tongue in place so you would no longer be defiant to the authorities above you.
That could be adapted.
A lot of things can be adapted,
Yeah. Okay.
especially this tool.
Okay. Ooh. So, does anyone have any idea what this is? If you read the paper, you probably have a pretty good idea of what this is, but...
Is it a dental implement?
No. No, it's a drill. But the wonderful thing about it, and I don't know if this is ivory or whalebone, it has probably ivory. It's beautifully made. The curious thing about it is after the bit or the drill bit is inserted, it's powered by a bow, which I don't have. But it would actually loop around the grooves that you see, and the grooves, they're not just grooves, but they're like threads. They go up and down. So as you're mowing, you add pressure. I'm not seeing. I thought this would swivel. I thought the handle
Andrew,
would swivel. Yeah.
using a bow in that way, would that be an adaptation of an indigenous tool?
I imagine so. I haven't given that much thought. But what is the date on this?
I think it's 1870s.
1870s.
I
So,
thought the fitted box was pretty extraordinary. The reason the newspaper chose to use it, it was the only tool we had that had color. But you'll notice that it was so carefully done that it's fitted with fabric, little bits of wool up there to make sure that it fits perfectly in the box. And anyone who's ever watched Antique Roadshow knows it's all in the box.
So it's really extraordinary. I was going to make a bow to bring tonight, but I wasn't sure that you'd let me use it. So, being ivory and all. And these are the bits. This one looks like it's a countersink that would, if you're putting a screw into wood, you would use that to get the head of the screw down. This is just a flat bit. I think this is really fine. So I really think that these are meant for, say, a cabinet maker, as opposed to a house writer or a house builder, for setting screws in furniture. That would be my guess.
I think it's amazing that that box has survived. I really do. And I love the hand-pressed paper, the handmade paper. Oh, this is wonderful. Does anyone have any idea what this might be used for? Well, you know, it's so important to feed your children. Christian, do you want to come over here? We can put something in here. Can you say ah? What do you think? What do you think this is? What does that look like to you? Do you know? What do you think? It looks like a bottle? You think it looks like a bottle? Well, what would you put in there and what would you push out of there? How about baby food? It's a sausage maker. So any good wife in the Hamptons, when it was time to make sausage, this made it so much easier.
You slip the casing over
But
the
you know
end.
what? I also, the amazing thing is what else would this have been used for? Would they have like pounded things with it or rolled things out with it? I think it had many other uses other than just being a part of a sausage press. But how amazing. Can you imagine it's time to have dinner and you have to make it yourself. You have to make the sausage yourself. You have to put it in the casings. You know, it's an amazing thing to see antiquated technology and to think that someone had dinner, made dinner with this many times.
Okay. This is a mystery to me, and I'm hoping that somebody out there would know exactly what this is for. Normally, I would call this a spoke shave or a draw knife. The curious thing is, on a normal draw knife, the blade, the sharp part, goes all the way across. But there's a loop here. So
Something with a lump in it.
I don't know, but you want to be able to work one side and then the other. I'm really at a loss. It possibly could be a Cooper's. Maybe there's a left and a right side. I see that there's an angle and an angle, so maybe the angle has something to do with left and right, and you would alternate. But I'm really at a loss. And we came here and we looked at the things and chose the things that we wanted to present for people's questions. I didn't want to know every single one because I'd like to know the answer to what this is. So if anyone has any idea, I mean, it could be for chamfering the top of a barrel, for finishing off the top of a barrel. There's Cooper's tools that were among this, but I don't know. Anyone?
Is it a draw knife type of affair?
It is certainly a draw knife, but the blade is interrupted. So why? That, I don't know if it's farrier's tool, as in the person who puts the shoes. Yeah, maybe. It's usually a file that they use for trimming the hoof. I don't know, but so it's a question mark for anyone. I should have Googled it, I think. Maybe, but still sharp stuff up here. So I don't know.
Oh, this I'm sure is a puzzle to many people. If I can get this out of here. Could you help me, man? My man? Don't break the artifacts.
No, I won't. I won't.
Gentle, gentle.
It's starting to come. There's one.
Thank you. Well, if this is a household implement, what might this be used for? What do you think?
I thought a flea comb.
I thought for lice at first, but after years of having an antique restoration business and painting faux finishes, this is a combing tool for faux finishes, and to actually hold some that may have been used in the area for decorative finishes in maybe on a domini piece of furniture. You know, in many colonial homes, many chairs were constructed out of different pieces, different types of wood. So the chair was painted, and then a combing tool or another decorative finish, whether it was a porphyry or a rolling rag, was applied to give it a uniformed look. And the uniformed look was to make the chair look more expensive than it was. So you might have a chair that was made out of pine and maple and scraps of cherry, but then it was painted to look like a burled walnut. Or you might have a door that was put together from scraps, but then it was combed to look like various types of wood. But usually, the faux finishes that were used with a combing tool had an almost fantasy aspect to it. It was a little bit bigger than just an actual replication of a wood burl. And that's where rolling rags came in, and using certain acids with powdered pigments. And a lot of the powdered pigments that they used, in fact, I would love to even see if there's any powdered pigments left on these tools. A lot of the powdered pigments they used, like, I don't know, cobalt, were poisonous. And I wonder what people suffered from, whether it was lead or certain chemicals that they were using as wood finishers. I mean, of course, they were all oil-based, mostly oil-based paints when it came to furniture like chairs and things like that. And of course, milk paints when it came to certain interiors, or calcium-based paints, which anyone who lives out here and lives in an antique house may have one room, and usually it's the ceiling, that no matter how many coats of paint you put on that ceiling, it peels and cracks. And that's because of a calcium-based paint that they used, I guess, a turn of the century or earlier. And you can't paint, the only way of removing it, you can't use any kind of modern method, you have to blowtorch it off. Yeah, you have to blowtorch it off, and that's the only, ammonia doesn't work. Not on the calcium-based paints. It just doesn't. But it's interesting to note that these kind of tools survived, and they were for a decorative purpose. And you think that if they were a knit comb, we'd have a lot of them. I mean, because when knits went around, people, shaved their heads and used things like kerosene, So, and that's, you had, explosions of body lice and things like that. So people use these. You think you'd have more of these for actual, household uses, but to actually have something like this survive is pretty amazing. Oh, that's yours.
This is mine.
That is yours.
I wish this was mine.
I don't know. Everyone look the other way. Andrew, bolt for the door.
Okay. I kind of like the aspect of having people guess. If you know what this is, let somebody guess who maybe doesn't know. What do you? Anyone? It looks like a plane, and it's no. It's a plow plane. A rabbit is close. That's a good guess, but it's a plow plane. There's a blade in the center here. This whole bit of furniture looking, it looks like crown molding, is very fanciful and perhaps speaks well of the plane maker. So you have the business side of it. There's a very thin blade. I'd say that's about 3/8 of an inch there. And this fence moves, it slides along these rods, and you can set a depth. These wedges are keeping it in place. You can set the distance between the blade and the fence and plane a groove in a piece of wood, and that might be for the back of a cabinet, to put that groove all the way around the edge of a board or a cabinet carcass. And I believe this this will, I think, lock it into position. So very specialized. And planes of this era usually have the maker's mark or the owner's mark. There's the maker. I can't read it. But it's just beautiful. And as a carpenter, I really appreciate, number one, being able to touch this and see it and play with it. But I appreciate what they had to go through because I have electric tools, I have a few hand tools, but this was it at the time. They didn't have an electric router or table saw. It's just barely moving. I'd like to tune this up sometime on the weekend. Can I take it home? But that's what this is. This is a plow plane, and I think it's just beautiful. I mean, the workmanship to cut that for fancy, just to when you showed up at the job or the house that you were working on, to pull this out of your toolbox spoke well. But I don't think it's walnut. I think it's beech. I think, and I could be wrong. And I often am, aren't I?
I would never say such a thing, especially after we were talking about gossip's bridles.
Right. But I think it's beech, and I believe that was a popular material to make hand planes out of. So, there's a good view of it. Oh, what is that?
Christian, what do you think this is? What does this look like to you?
A ladder.
A ladder? Do you think it's a ladder? What kind of ladder would that be? If that's a very short ladder, would it be a ladder to get into a bed? Like a trundle bed? I don't know about that. What else could it be used for? Any ideas? If you don't have any processed food and you yourself are the food processor, what kind of food would you process with this? Processed cheese food. It was the Velveeta maker of the time. This is a cheese ladder. So you would put cheesecloth and strain the whey, and you would make your curds and whey, and then you'd make your cheese. You'd add some rennet from sheep's guts and make your own cheese. But can you imagine having a fresh food, a fresh cheese that you made yourself? And now we know all the benefits of whey and feeding that to your child. How amazing is that? But what a time-consuming process. And that's why there's usually certain days that you made things, or certain times of the years, or certain weather conditions. Just as when Andrew's finishing something, you can't spray or you can't apply a finish during certain humid conditions. There are times that you really can't make certain food because of the weather conditions. It would either mold, or it wouldn't set right, or the yeast wouldn't rise. But it's amazing that we have something like this, a cheese ladder, that was used locally to make curds and whey. So next time you have cottage cheese, there you go.
I wonder if you could use that to individually wrap a slice of cheese.
That's an Andrew slice of cheese.
Oh, okay, okay. This is a good one. We looked at this. We had a preview of all these articles, and I had no idea what it was. I mean, to me, it looks like chopsticks, like a chopstick trainer. Poke somebody in the eyes with it, and I just started looking at it, and it really occurs to me that form follows function.
Well, you have to explain when you were looking at it in the attic of the building, and here are all these wonderful artifacts, and he's trying to figure this out, and I'm looking at him, he's bending over, and I'm like, what are you doing with your loafers? And what happened?
I had an epiphany.
He had
I looked at
a
this.
hush puppy epiphany.
There's a flat spot and there's a round spot. So I know that it belongs on the flat spot, not on the round. And this end is flat and these are rounded. So it just suddenly occurred to me that it's a boot jack. It's a homemade boot jack. And I want to make one because I could really use it.
And how useful that was, especially if you're out in the fields and you've been working around the livestock and you don't want you don't want to soil your hands, and to have something help you take off your shoes.
This is true. This is true. So yeah, you didn't want to touch the stuff that was on your shoes. And it's curious to me. I'm looking at the way it was made, and I'm looking at the pegs that go through it. I don't know if you can really see, but they're sort of square, and I think that friction just holds it in because they're square in a round hole, which is interesting to me. They tap that together, so it looks like it's made out of oak to me. So, what do you think?
Oh, one of my favorites, and this is something that I have friends who can master this. I have yet to do so, and I was wondering what anyone thought that might be. What might this be used for? Any ideas? Yes. It is a tape loom. And why was it is a tape loom? And why was tape so important in the 18th and 19th centuries? Tape. Well, tape, you'd weave tape out of usually wool. It'd be wool tape. Sometimes it's linen tape, or then later on cotton tape. But if you only had a few items of clothing, and especially your work clothing, you would use tape to bind the edges of all of your clothing. So for an example, and I had a dear friend reproduce an 18th century quilted petticoat for me many years ago. And this is all completely hand done. The fabric is hand dyed, and it's a reproduction of a quilted petticoat that's in the DAR Museum in Washington. And the pattern is amazing. But the reproduction tape on the waistband is very telling, because it's wool tape that was used to set a waistband. So instead of having a drawstring waist that had more friction and more wear, a taped waist actually allowed the garment a longer life. And what you find in many petticoats of the time, and in fact many frock coats, vests, and jackets, is that the edges of petticoats, just like my petticoat here, is edged in wool tape. And the interesting thing, especially for women in New England, thank you so much, and depending on their cultural background, wool tape was very necessary if you were going to be cooking around an open fire. And why is wool tape very important to have when you're cooking around an open fire? It doesn't catch on fire, it smolders. So having wool tape while you're cooking was absolutely necessary. Some of the most interesting accounts of the uses of wool tape were actually in runaway slave ads. And you can read these, online, 18th century slave ads, and they'll say a jacket, a white jacket bound in blue or bound in red, and we really get an idea of what these things were used for, but not only that, how colorful their costume was, how colorful, what they wore was. But the other aspect of using wool tape, the colloquial aspect of it, was depending on if you were of an English background or a French Huguenot background or a Dutch background, it was all culturally how a woman had her petticoats and how she worked around the house. So if I was a Dutch woman, my petticoat would be just below my knees, maybe an inch or two below my knees. My petticoats would be wool, and the tape would be wool. If I was an English women liked longer petticoats, but they also had a lot more issues about catching fire. There's more fire issues and things like that. And French Huguenot women, if you look at French Huguenot clothing from the 18th century, their petticoats were very short. Their petticoats were at knee length. And then they had very brightly colored wool stockings. So the technology that women employed to keep themselves safe while they were doing their household duties is very, very interesting. And how they made sure that if you have one piece of clothing or one or two pieces of clothing, how did you make that clothing always look nice or refresh it or keep it in a way that you would look good, you could do your work, and you could always replace the tape. If the body of the clothing was fine, it took maybe a few hours to replace wool tape instead of making an entire new outfit. And of course, once your clothing was completely done, you would sell it to the rag man where they would make paper. And the interesting thing that we found is there are certain papers that are blue papers that come from the use of woad and indigo being used to dye wool. And it took on this wonderful, in fact, we can show Christian's regimental. The indigo trade from the South, we had dyed wool that it was a uniform color, it was beautiful, it stayed that deep color, so tape was utilized, and once it went to the ragman, you couldn't get that indigo out. So there's many documents that are on blue paper, thanks to selling of the old wool outfits that no longer served a purpose.
The rag. What's really interesting to me with that item is the inscription on it. Can you read the inscription?
I'm at the age where I need glasses to read the inscription.
Betsy Jones, it's right
Oh.
up there.
Oh, there it is.
And is there a year for that?
I think it's 1809. I don't really remember. I haven't seen it in a while.
Well, I think the most decorative use of tape is when Andrew was making a British regimental, and he had to use wool tape to decoratively embroider over his wool buttonholes.
The buttons, yeah, they're called bastion loops. And
bastion
they're,
loops.
They're a five-sided loop around the button, and it's purely decorative. And the British uniforms were very decorative. I have have to wonder if they spent more time sewing than fighting. There was a time where I had to overcome that gap in the time because I had hours and hours in that coat, and unfortunately I've outgrown that coat. It's been a while, but I still have it. A lot of work went into that.
And it really gives you a sense of appreciation where we have closets full of clothes that become outmoded very quickly, and they had one or two pieces of clothing because it took so long to sew and it took so long to make, and it was important to, freshen it, to keep it active. Yes?
Why are there so many slots?
Oh, for the width. How wide you're going to make the tape. So, and the style of tape and how wide you would make the tape. If where Christian's regimental has cut out, can you want to show the regimental and the size of the regimental?
What are we showing? Showing what?
Where Christian's regimental, it was cut wool to bind it on the sides. We have, in the collection here, we have a frock coat that not only has cuffs, but bound cuffs, bound with wool tape. So it really depends on what you were using it for. You might want an inch wide of tape to bind your sleeves or your petticoat, or you might want something wider depending on what you were doing. If I was working by a fire, I would want a much wider section of wool tape to keep me safe. So if any sparks flew off, I wouldn't go up. I wouldn't go up in flames. It would just smolder out. So yeah, it's very interesting.
I'd like to mention also with the British coat that I don't have here, which you all have to imagine, the tape isn't just one color, but there's actually stripes in it.
Yes.
And England's wonderful because they have such things that survive, and you can look at it. The American side of the revolution doesn't have so many surviving pieces, but by using different threads in that loom, you can achieve that, if I'm not mistaken.
Exactly. And blanket edgings and things like that. So, and you have to remember too that wool is naturally, just because of how it is, repels certain vermin. And they don't know why. Maybe it's how it is, but there's less lice, there's less nits when you utilize wool. And it might have something to do with how wool was cleaned back then. Maybe the spot cleaning and using linseed oil. Linseed oil is a natural antiseptic, and when they had a sick room, they would, and you remember when linoleum came out, and hearing about linoleum in the Victorian time, linoleum actually forms a germicidal barrier. So when they used any linseed oil or linoleum, it actually made the place sterile, and that's why they were used for sick rooms. And what was very interesting in the 19th century, they developed a very beautiful decorative technique that mimicked tooled leather called lincrustia, and they would use a linoleum-type floor with lincrustia on the walls, and it was a completely sterile environment. So if you had someone sick with, chicken pox or measles or mumps, they were kept in those rooms.
So, and one last thing I want to say about the loom is, as a carpenter, think about how would you go about making that back in 1815? You'd have to find a tree, and you'd probably want the center cut of the tree. That's one piece of wood, and you have to cut all those slots and give it some curve and some form.
And how much information did you need from the technician who was weaving, from the weaver?
Oh, sure. It's probably well refined over the years as to. I don't think it's going to get much better than that without electricity.
Well, and I wonder, what did she sit on? What did you sit on to do this? Did you stand up to do this? Did you sit down to do this? Were there any other tools used to make this? And the beautiful shape of it?
And why is it shaped?
And why is it shaped like that? Did you hold it between your knees? And if your spouse got out of line, you could paddle them with it. Don't get any ideas? But it's amazing that this has survived. Sit down now. Okay, thank you.
Okay, all right. This, what is this? This is metal. These teeth here are metal. Everything else is wood, and it's rather curious. And I figured it out, I believe. But is there anyone that wants to guess what it could be? Metal. It has some teeth. Almost looks like a saw blade. Looks very much like a saw blade. There's a better shot of it. Yeah, no. I mean, theoretically, yes, it could be a scribe, but it's going to do more cutting than scratching. This, I believe, was a cooper's tool. If the barrel was made, and if indeed the cooper used this to chamfer the top of the barrel to make the top of the barrel round, and has anyone ever looked at a barrel, the lid fits into a groove. And I believe that this is worked this way. I'm looking at the teeth, and I'm remembering my training in shop class, and these are cross-cut teeth, which go across the grain as opposed to plow or chiseled teeth that go with the grain. So to me, it's pretty much a no-brainer that this was a cooper's tool for cutting the lid groove in the top of a barrel. There's probably a better name for that. Part of my love of this old stuff is trying to figure it out. And form really follows function. It's you look at it and try and figure it out. So it's kind of crude, but I'm sure it worked well.
Whatever could these be used for? Yeah, I keep thinking if anyone's had ever seen the movie Dangerous Liaisons, and at the end it shows certain glass cups being used as a healing modality where they would place these on the sympathetic nervous system and light a candle to it, and would have a suctioning quality to pull out the bad humors. And we've had some discussion whether it was that or what could these be? If these were used in the household, what could these be? Not measuring cups.
You can't set them down, right? They're round bottom. They're not gonna.
Well, you can set them down, but not all of them. Some
Not
have.
all of them.
Some have a
They wouldn't
basically
be
probably
very
had a
steady.
holder. Well, you know, if you think about early occupations for women in the household, what was an occupation that a woman at the time could make money at? That she could produce herself, she could make money, and it would contribute to the household.
Medicinal herbs.
Oh, possibly, but not this use. My great-grandmother had 16 children. Milk. This is for breast milk. So this was used to express breast milk. There he is. Right here. And up until the early part of the last century, being a paid wet nurse was an occupation. You know, I remember 25, 30 years ago living in Woodstock and visiting with other local artist wives, and they were nursing each other's children. And of course, we think that's a gasp now, but that, you know, being a paid wet nurse and expressing milk and using your milk was something that was common, that there's no social aberration to it. And in fact, when you read about certain events in local history, it was also a way that you had the native population interact with the residents of East Hampton, where you had Native American women actually bringing their babies to be nursed by local women. And whether they did that in order so they can work, or whether they were trying to create familial bonds between their population and the Dutch or the English that lived here, it's a very interesting thing to note that it was actually done. And sometimes to some unfortunate events where babies didn't thrive and babies, got sick and died, and the woman who was paid as a wet nurse was blamed. Hugh King should know this. When a woman was blamed for the death of someone, whether they were responsible or not, what were they accused of? Oh, well, no. If she was nursing and the baby didn't thrive and it passed away, what could that woman have been accused of? Witchcraft. And we have this idea of witch's milk, which might seem good at the time and then makes someone sick. But witch's milk is also something that when you have a young child, a young baby, and hormones are passed from the mother, babies will actually express milk. That's called witch's milk, and often thought that the baby was going to be a changeling. And a changeling, do you know what a changeling is? A changeling is a child that was taken by the fairies or taken by the witches, and a child that looks just like your baby and acts just like your baby and cries just like your baby is left in its place. And until that baby grows and grows and grows, and they turn to be about 12 or 13 years old, and they turn into something completely different and possibly bedeviled. So they would call that child might be a changeling. A teenager. And all of us who survived our children's teenage years will know about that. But often when I look at this cup, I wonder what kind of holder was used for that, It's a beautiful little thing, but how was that held, and how was that implemented, and how did they keep that for the child, and was that poured into maybe a pablum spoon? These are things that we don't know. Things that we do know and things that we don't know. So, yes.
It's steel, and I don't know what it is. Anyone?
Did it come off a handle?
Well, it kind of looks like a handle, and it looks like the slot here is tapered, so it almost looks like, I think, turn of the century back into the 19th century, a nut and bolt, the nut would be square, and it almost occurs to me that maybe this is like a multi-sized, it's no great difference in size, but the end has a square hole. This has a slot, so maybe you could tighten it and crank something. Is it a bed wrench? It's a bed wrench.
It's for a Sheraton bed from the 1820s, which is held together with bolts. Part of them are bolts, and the others are large handmade screws. So that's why you have the capability for screws or bolts.
Sorry, I'm glad you came tonight, Richard. It's a bed wrench. Oh, can I see the number on there?
Not for tightening the bed, not for tightening
Not for the ropes. It's for the rails.
Okay.
Rails, right? Because the earlier beds, the rails were held by the ropes, which meant that it was not so good for the bed. So later on, they had these large handmade threaded bolts and screws which would hold it all together. So. In fact, even to guarantee it, we have the bed, and this was attached to the bed. So.
There we go.
That looks painful.
It does look. I suppose it could be. It's
Careful, Chris.
This looks like no, it's okay. This looks like leather padding on one side, and these spikes. Anyone?
Now I was thinking that was for carding wool.
No, it's kind
But it has to be
of
in-
spaced.
There we have.
Ding 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 ding. Carpet in the day could be, they could pick it up, I'll do it gently on this cloth, but you could stretch the carpet and install carpet tacks, so you didn't have wrinkles in your rug.
Over the padding, over the, was it straw or horsehair?
Straw for ingrain carpet,
Straw padding.
which would have been the original wall-to-wall carpet.
Very interesting.
And it's interesting, I'm looking at the carpet tacks are holding on this piece of leather to the tool itself.
What I
So-
find interesting is the use of straw for padding. Last year, after an event that Christian was playing in the straw, he had his regimental on, he had his outfit on. A day or two later, he broke out in a rash, and they thought it was chickenpox. And I was like, well, he was vaccinated, but they said, oh, he can still get the chickenpox. And it was around his wrists, and it was around his neck, and it was around anywhere he wasn't covered, around his ankles. And so I took him to the peds, and they were like, oh, no, well, we don't know if it's chickenpox. And it kept, then it started to move, and it went from his wrist, and it traveled up his arms, and it went from his ankles and up his legs, to the point that I kept taking him back, and they prescribed this, that, and the other thing. They're saying, I don't know. And then I took him to a dermatologist, and they didn't know what it was until I did some research, especially on 18th century maladies, and found that there is such a thing called hay mites. So our little boy actually suffered from an 18th century malady by playing 18th century. And you're silly. And as soon as they did that, they found the cream for it, and it was cleared up within, a few days. But it looked the same as a chicken pox. Little tiny, it was and itchy and uncomfortable. But the strange thing is, it didn't start where chicken pox start, which is usually on the trunk of a child. It was anywhere he wasn't covered by his clothing. And as soon as his clothing was off, they traveled, and they're invisible to the eye. You can't see them. They're kind of like chiggers. Very similar to chiggers, but they're only in hay. So can you imagine you're putting hay down for your padding of your carpet, and your little child is rolling around? I mean,
What are germs?
if you can't see them, do they exist?
Of course not.
Oh, there you are.
Oh, there I am. Okay, ooh, double. Shaped sort of like a spatula or a pie server. It's not. It may look like a very decorative, but these holes are different sized, and they're threaded, and they're beveled. And I believe that this is either a gauge to size threads for screws, or because of the way it's shaped, and I'm not completely convinced, but I think if a blacksmith is making screws, he can use this to chamfer the head of the screw. So it's a very specialized tool, maybe even to thread it. So tap and die would be a similar thing, but I think this is just specialized for screws. This item, anyone? It's not a honey dipper. Not. It's made out of iron. It's got slots on either side, different size. Could be a gauge, but I think it might be a saw set. If you have a handsaw and you have the teeth and you sharpen the teeth on the handsaw, for those of you who don't know, the teeth are bent. They're not all in line, much like the teeth on this item. So this would set the teeth for the kerf, which is the slot in the wood that you're cutting. And again, it just blows my mind that these are handmade by the very talented blacksmith.
Oh, very important in the household in East Hampton. Anyone have any ideas what this might be used for? Pardon? Not a salt shaker. Not a pepper grinder. You have to remember, your home was also your office. And someplace like Mulford Farm, it might have done trade. And when you do trade, you have to sign your name. And when you signed your name, you had to do what? Sand. Sand to dry the ink. So, and very important in any household, any kind of business you did, any kind of commerce, any kind of writing, you needed to have that sand shaker, or you'd have quite a mess. That's my favorite.
That's my favorite.
No, that's my favorite.
That's my favorite.
I saw this and I couldn't figure it out right away. It's interesting. I do military reenacting, and this piece right here is a spring, and it's very similar to a spring on a flintlock, which makes me wonder if it's actually is off of an old gun or some reused article. Anyone? Any idea? It's a rat trap. And what a contrivance. I mean, it's got this lever being raised against this spring, it suddenly has tension, and there's a catch at the top. So this lever comes up and catches, which goes across the top. And there's this whole thing is so well contrived. I suppose that you make the cheese first with the ladder, and then put a little dab of it down here. And there's like a trip lever on the top, and it just takes a little pressure of annoying varmint, and it's going to release this lever, which is going to crush the neck of the rat against these teeth. And I don't know what the hole in the back is about. That may be just to give it. Yeah, but I'm just looking at it from a. I mean, I think it's just beautiful that the way it was made. I mean, the edges are chamfered. There's definitely a shape to it. I mean, you have this round, kind of similar to that. It comes across 18th century rat trap.
It's also interesting, it was given to us by Adelaide Jumanil. And when she was moving, she had me out to look around and choose what I'd like before they packed everything up to take it home or whatever. And I went to that, and she said, well, that's interesting. It came from the Purple House, which is right up there, and was one of the buildings they moved. And after the building was moved, they went up in the attic, and there it was on the floor. It must have been in a rafter, and it had fallen. So she said it was one of the few artifacts she had that came with the houses. So.
Oh. I get a little squeamish about this one. Any ideas what this might have been used for? Beautiful little leather box. In a leather box like this, it must have been something very important. Little brass tool. Anyone have any idea what that might be?
Looks very professional.
In fact, I'd rather you do this one.
Have you gotten this to work, to actually work?
I'm afraid that I'm going to break the little screw, so they'll
Right.
just have to know that when you push it, little sharp blades come up.
Right. And it's very beautifully made. I don't know the date on this, but
Probably around 1810.
okay. There are slots in the bottom, and presumably blades that come out, and presumably when you press this lever, there's also a little turn screw at the top, and it seems an adjustment wheel on the side. But why would those sharp blades, why would you need to press that lever and have blades come out? Why would you need to do that?
Meat tenderizer?
No. For bloodletting.
Oh, for goodness sake.
It's a
So
fleam.
it's a fleam, a mechanical fleam, which I've never seen before.
Fleam.
Fleam, F-L-E-E-M, I believe. How many people died because they
Yeah.
got that used on them? Okay, putting that back.
Oh, it's a cudgel. Any ideas? Don't let the. And I find it very interesting that, when this was used as a key to tighten your rope bed, when you tightened it, it actually sprung and all the bed bugs jumped up. You could actually see them. So sleep tight, don't let the bed bugs bite. Sleeping tight was you tightened the ropes to the point it went boing, and then all the little bed bugs came out and you actually got to see them. But I just can't imagine. And as when I look at this, I see the little holes. I'm like, bed bugs. But the interesting thing is that we're having this statewide issue with bed bugs. I wonder what they did in the 18th century. And there were certain herbs that they used as insecticides that they either tied around their bed or actually added to the stuffing of their bed. And one of it was nettles, stinging nettles. And nettles was very, very beautiful, amazing plant. Of course, it was used as a pot herb. You could, steam nettles, you could cook nettles, you could make it into a soup. But the great thing about nettles is dried nettles could be boiled down into like a tea, and you could use it in your garden to get rid of aphids and other little critters. Today, if you want to put in a spray bottle with a little bit of dish soap, nettle tea with a little dish soap will get rid of most of your common garden pests. But in the 18th century, they would use little bundles of dried nettles, and they might put it inside of their straw mattress to keep away the vermin. Oh, this is a lot of fun. What could this be? Come over here, baby.
Is that child retriever?
Come over here, little man. What could that be? What do you think, Christian? What would that be? What would that be used for?
Maybe
Getting the pie off the fire.
Getting the pie off the fire. Can you? How often do they eat pie? This is what I wonder. Why would you? Do you eat pie all that? How many times a week would you eat a pie? Every day. Well, if you could, wouldn't you? Isn't that amazing, though? And I wonder, is this a colloquial tool? Is this a tool that was developed out here and never spread to other parts of the country? Is this something that someone out here just invented and we don't know anything else?
and it opens and shuts.
And it opens and it shuts. Very interesting. Very interesting stuff. But as a colonial cook and recreating colonial dishes, I can truly appreciate this. There's so many times that you cook over an open fire and you cannot lift the pie. Or Andrew and I have an 18th century hearth at home, and during the holidays, we have a few fiascos during the holidays.
Quite a few fiascos.
Cooking on the open fire. But
One Thanksgiving, we ate the vegetables first.
and ate the turkey the next day. We had a vegetarian Thanksgiving, and we had a fat Tuesday the day after, where we had our turkey and such. But going into a Dutch oven or lifting a pie, can we take this home?
It doesn't seem like it would be strong enough to lift something heavy.
Well, you had a light.
Well, not always. There's a lot of ceramic.
You could probably use that with a hook as well if you got it held, and you could lift with a hook as well, just so long as you.
That is from the 20s, 1920s.
Oh, it is.
Oh,
Okay.
1920. So then it was tin.
Daddy.
I know.
I wonder if it was invented by Table Talk.
Could be.
Table Talk pies.
Okay.
I think we have time to do two more.
All right. This, I love this because it's just beautiful. It's just a beautiful little piece. Any ideas? Close. It's for sewing. What would it have been used for? It was used for sewing, and it was used for holding material. So you could quilt, or you could put on your wool tape. But I remember my girlfriend using clamps as she was quilting this petticoat. So something like, how wonderful to have something pretty while you're doing that. Just a lovely little piece of technology, and something nice for the ladies to see.
It has a bird on it. It has a bird on it.
Isn't it?
Hold it in the mouth.
And bird on it.
It has a bird on it. Yes, it does. And it does have a small little pin cushion, and filled with sawdust, so it would take the rust off of your needles. Lovely. It's just beautiful. Just absolutely beautiful. Oh, this is a fun one. Oh, you must guess. What could this be? Beautifully decorated. Not shortbread. Not butter.
What are these symbols here? What is?
Well, it can
That's
tell you
not- that's
basically
not
where
Greek.
where it might come from.
Star.
And what kind of trade did we have with a place that had those kind of
stars
symbols?
on the top.
If this was from China, what could it be? It is actually a brick of tea. This is a brick of tea. And pressing it into a brick ensured that it would get to its destination without being moldy, and so compressed you can even have more than a big, large amount of loose tea leaves. So how much tea was here?
Probably about as much that would fit in probably a 6-inch tea box. That would be about 12 inches.
Now, I wonder, do you think there was a specific tool that was used to break off the tea?
There were probably there was. Although there's a charming English story from the 1860s where the woman, just hits it on the end of her kitchen table, and she gets enough, puts it in the hot water, then of course it all turns into open tea. And if you smell this thing,
You can still smell
it
it.
still has the odor of
It's
tea.
amazing. It's just amazing with the age, and it's just absolutely beautiful.
It was developed during the Civil War because of the blockades, because of the certain European countries who were pro the Confederates, and a lot of the ships with tea in the hold would be sitting in harbor and it would mildew. So this was used for just a short period of time, and you could have supposedly about 200% more tea could be shipped in these blocks than in the tea containers.
It's amazing.
So guys, I think you did a great job.
I think for sure, take a bow. Thank you.
Thank you everybody for coming. You're welcome to come up front and look at the objects and ask questions if you like, and otherwise we'll see you next year.
Thank you very much.